Hi beer friends, what's going on? My name is Tammy. I also go by the Brewess. Welcome to my channel. This is my first video and I've been wanting to do something on YouTube for a long time and I just have kept putting it off. So no time like the present. I have a good friend that does beer reviews on YouTube as well, and he's encouraged me for a while. So I thought now is the time to just take him up on his advice. So thanks, Greg. A little bit about me. I'm a brewer and a winemaker. I live in Southern Ontario in Canada, but I am originally from California. So I've kind of lived all over the continent. I've been brewing for about 8 years now and making wine for about 2 years. I started home brewing. I worked at a homebrew supply store. Then I went and did a brewing science program at the graduate level, and then I started working as a professional brewer. So beer has always been a love of mine, as well as wine. So wine is my second love, but beer is my first love. So I love learning about beer and wine and pretty much any fermented beverage. So I've actually been studying for the last year or so for my certified Cicerone exam, which is a certification exam you can take as a beer industry professional. I've done level 1, I'm working on level 2, and there's 4 levels, so we'll see kind of how far I get. But it's basically, it's a very intense written course, test, and then there's also a tasting component that goes along with it. So what I've come to realize about myself is that I'm not that great still with being able to determine different styles of beers during a blind tasting. And there's also a lot of descriptive words that we use to describe beer. And I tend to use kind of like the very surface level words, like this is floral or this is fruity, and there's a lot of different words that you could use and should be using to make it a little bit more descriptive. So what I thought is that being a former educator, I do really well when I teach other people about something. It kind of reinforces it in my brain. And it's also sort of situational. If I drink something and I remember where I was or what I was doing, it sort of helps me remember the beer. So I thought, I don't know, maybe other people can use this. It might be helpful. I have certain beer styles that I tend to struggle with more than others, and I'll tell you what they are in a little bit. But I thought maybe I will just do a short video on one beer at a time, and then that'll kind of help me with my learning, and then maybe it'll help someone else as well. So before I go too much further, I just want to show you there's some things that you can use to help with your beer tasting journey. A lot of these are free resources, so you can find them online, or maybe if you know someone that works in the industry, they've got some of these handouts for you and you can borrow them. So this first one I have is a sensory lexicon from Yakima Chief Hops, and you can download this from their website. And because I'm really nerdy about this kind of thing, I laminated it. So this can work for hops or beer. And it basically just has like different categories of flavors and aromas that you can use to describe what you're drinking and what you're smelling. So I'm going to use that for sure. When we talk about tasting beer and evaluating beer, especially if you're trying to determine what style it is, or maybe if you're judging, we talk a lot about color. So this is a very basic color chart from Prud'homme, and this is a Canadian training course, which is similar to Cicerone, but it's based in Canada. So I took this level 1 a couple years ago, and I got this color chart, but you can also find basic color charts online. And beer basically ranges from very light to very dark. So if you're thinking like light lager or like a stout, so there's a lot of variation. So when we talk about beer, we don't really want to just say, oh, this is this is dark, or this is light, or this is amber. Like there's steps in between all of those, so it's helpful to have those words to use. There's also sort of a flavor and aroma tasting wheel. This is also from Prud'homme, but you can find this a lot of different places as well. And what's nice about this is that it kind of breaks it down by category. So you might say, okay, what does it taste like? Okay, it's a dark beer. And then it'll give you options like, do you get coffee? Do you get chocolate? Do you get molasses? You know, it breaks it up by like fruit, field, which is like botanicals or plants. The malt itself can have a lot of different characteristics in there. So it's kind of nice to say, okay, I'm drinking this beer and I get, you know, a sort of sweet malt taste, and then you can break it down even further. Because a lot of times too, people say, oh, this beer's really malty. Well, what does that mean? Because all beer has malt in it. So be a little bit, you know, more able to pinpoint that. And then this last one that I'm going to show, this is actually new to me. I just took my WSET level 1 in wine, and WSET is based in London, but they actually have partners that administer the courses throughout the world. So I did mine through the Napa Valley Wine Academy. And it started out with wine and spirits, and they have what they call the SAT, or the systematic approach to tasting. And basically you start with what does this sample look like? What is the color? What's the aroma, etc., etc. And then you kind of go from there. And it's nice because you can sort of like circle. They have like options that you can sort of circle if you're doing like one sample that you want to document. But they also just started last year, they introduced a beer course as well. So I have the SAT for beer through the WSET. And so you start with what color is it? Is it clear? Is it opaque? Is it cloudy, etc.? And then you just kind of sort of work your way down with, you know, how it tastes, how it feels on your palate. And then on the back, what's nice is that they actually have a lot of those keywords as well. So, you know, if for some reason sometimes you can't think of a word and you're like, well, I get berries. Well, what kind of berries? Is it strawberry or raspberry or cherry or whatever? You know, they have suggestions there or options. And another important thing when we're tasting beer, and hopefully we won't find this a lot in the commercial examples that I'm going to try, but there's off flavors as well. So this one's got a list of kind of the most prominent off flavors you would find in beer, and those come from lots of different places. It could be an infection, it could be something with the fermentation didn't go well, etc. So basically there's certain flavors that match each different problem. So that's something to look for as well. But again, I'm going to actually just be trying commercial examples that I'm able to find where I live. And that's because when you are studying for Cicerone, they're very big on what is considered true to style. So, you know, maybe you have a local brewery that does like a really amazing German Pilsner, but is that actually like true to the style as it's written in like the judging rules and the Brewers Association you know, style guidelines, or is it like their own twist on it? So I've gotten name brands that I can find, and I'm just going to go one at a time and taste them. So I tend to drink, like a lot of people that got into craft beer probably in the last 10 to 20 years, I really enjoy IPAs. So I drink a lot of IPA, and I pretty much will drink anything, but I don't usually go for lighter styles like a lager. I don't want to say a lager, but maybe like a Pilsner or a lot of the German style lagers. If it's a dark lager, I love it, but it just, for some reason, the lighter things like don't excite me very much. I also struggle with some German styles, especially if it's a wheat beer, or Belgian styles, because I'm not a fan of the yeast. The yeast gives off what we call like phenolic compounds, and it can taste like banana or spicy or different kinds of fruity notes, or even like what we call like barnyard. And I just don't enjoy those aromas or those flavors. So I tend to not really drink any of those beers. So what I found is that when I've been studying for Cicerone, there's the different styles of beer are all kind of broken up by region. So you've got, British and Irish styles, American, German, and Czech. And then you've got Belgian, and there's another one I think I'm forgetting. But basically, I've done pretty good with a lot of the British styles. I've done pretty well with the American styles. Being American, that's, was a hope of mine. But when I got to the German and the Czech and the Belgian, it was just like, I just cannot remember these beers. And one thing I'll point out too is that when you're studying for Cicerone, it's not just what does this beer taste like. They are asking for specific information, like what is the bitterness of this beer, and you have to know kind of the range of the bitterness. What is the color, and you have to know the range of the color. The ABV, there's a lot of different parameters that you're kind of supposed to memorize. And if you're looking at a group of beers from one country, a lot of them can be very similar. So it's very confusing for me, and I just get tripped up every time. So I thought, okay, I'm going to start with some of the ones I'm having trouble with, and then maybe this will sort of help me as I go along. So, yeah, I'm just going to start with a classic, and I've got here a can of Spaten, which is a very old, very well-known brewery in Munich. It's been around since the late 1300s, and a lot of the beers in Munich centuries ago were very dark, and then there kind of was this turning point where they started making lighter beers. And so a lot of times when you see like a Munich HELLES, it's going to be a light beer, and every pretty much brewery in the Munich area is going to have their own version of that light beer. So that's something I have trouble with, because I feel like they all just sort of taste the same. They look the same. But if you go there and you're at, a beer garden, each place has its own client base. They go to that place because they like that version of the Munich HELLES. So they taste different to other people. I'm gonna try. So one thing I've noticed, and I'll get this going here, is that when I taste these beers, I tend to just think, okay, this smells really sweet, like honey. This smells a little, almost like grassy. And what I've been trying to do is pour my beer. I do the initial smell, and then what I try to do is I have a notebook and I write down what I'm getting from it. Is it, like I said, is it honey? Is it grassy? Is it corn? Is it toast? Is it biscuit, cookie? Those kinds of things. And then I go back later after I've done tasting, and I check the style guidelines to see if I'm actually like on track and I've kind of gotten, close to what it should be. So I'm going to use the WSET SAT right now, because I think it's like the best, most straightforward tasting guide. So basically the first thing we look at is clarity. So clear, slightly hazy, cloudy, or opaque. So this is pretty clear. And I've got sun coming from this way, so you can kind of tell that that's pretty clear. And that is like very true to a Munich HELLES style lager. If there's any sort of haze or anything, it's probably going to get rejected. And I've even been there and ordered a Dunkel, and people thought that was too dark. Like, why are you drinking such a dark beer? So they like their very light and they're very clear beers. So next we're going to look at the color. Straw, gold, amber, copper, brown, black, other. So obviously we can get rid of half of those at one fell swoop because it's not amber, copper, brown, etc. So straw and gold, I kind of have trouble with this sometimes because, like, what is gold? Is it like a yellow? Is it like more you think like a metallic gold? So I actually, that's when we can kind of use this color wheel. So I would say this is straw, because it's very pale, but it's not like if you think of like an American light lager, it's not like almost like watery, like very like if you had water and then you just add a little bit of beer in it and gave it some color. So I'm gonna go with straw. Foam. So foam is basically the foam that you get when you pour the beer. And because foam is basically made up of CO2 bubbles, it will dissipate pretty quickly. So I poured my beer and I've been talking and now I've been smelling it. And so a lot of that has sort of dissipated. But if there's no foam, that means you've probably got a beer that's maybe a little undercarbonated, or maybe it's a cask beer. So you want to have some showing. And the options that we get for WSET are none, small, medium, or large. So I probably would have said that this head of foam, that's what it's called, is the head, is small to medium. And then other observations, the head retention, that means how long does this foam actually last once you pour it. Sediment, etc. There's no sediment, which is anything that would be kind of like floating around. But I know that being such a large commercial brewery, they do filter their beer. So they're basically filtering out anything that might, end up in the beer. And they've all got labs and do quality and, quality control and things like that. So now we smell it. So the nose is basically what you smell. And we're looking at the intensity. Is it light, medium, or pronounced? So I would say this is medium to pronounced, because as soon as I get my nose in there, I'm getting something, but it's not like hitting me in the face with any one thing. It's just like a very pleasant aroma. And then from there, we can go even further and say, what are the characteristics of the aroma? Is it, do you get anything from the malt or the grain? Which again would be some of those notes like toast or corn or grass. Do you get anything from the yeast or the hops? So, when we talk about hops, it could be anything like citrus, resin, pine, fruit, tropical. Typically German style beers are using German hops, which tend to be a little bit more herbal. So I'm not getting anything super overwhelming, because they don't want that. They want it to be balanced. They don't want you to get like hit in the face with the hops in the Helles. And I don't notice any off aromas or off like anything like we talked about that would be like bacteria or infection or a problem with the fermentation or the brewing process. So now we taste it. I'm finally getting to that point. So the first thing that we want to think about is the palate and the body. So how carbonated is this beer? I think it's pretty pleasantly and appropriately carbonated. So I would say medium. If you have a beer that's like a cask, or maybe it's like a really high ABV, like dark beer, your carbonation is going to be a little bit lower. If you're talking about like a lighter style beer, typically it tends to be medium. And then if you're getting into some kind of specialty beers at times, you're gonna have very high carbonation. So this is kind of like middle of the road. So I would say medium. And body is just sort of like, how does it feel like once you drink it? Is it syrupy? Is it really thin and watery? Like what are you getting from it? And I would also say this is like a medium body. Alcohol. So there's a couple different ways to look at this. You can look at the can, obviously. This is a 5.2% beer by ABV. But there are times where, obviously, if you're drinking something and it's very light and thin, you kind of just know that it's probably not going to be very high ABV. A lot of the alcohol comes from the malt. So the yeast eats the sugar from the malt, and that's what produces the alcohol or the ethanol. So if you have a really light beer that's light on the malt, you're not going to have a lot of sugar to start with. If you are drinking your beer and you notice that it's kind of like warming, when you drink liquor, you kind of get that burn once you swallow it. It's probably higher ABV. So this is kind of, it's not noticeable. I get a little bit once I drink it. And now I feel like I'm just making things up, but I know that it's not warming. It's not a super high ABV. But knowing a little bit about the style, I do also know that it's not going to be super light. It's not going to be like under 3%. Then we look at bitterness and sweetness. And, for most beers, you want it to be balanced because the bitterness is what balances the sweetness. So to me, this is pretty well balanced. When I initially drink it, I get a little bit of bitterness, like as I'm swallowing, but it doesn't linger. And sometimes we talk about lingering bitterness. And if you've ever had, one of these crazy IPAs, it's bitter, and then you drink it and it's like, it's in your mouth, and you keep tasting it, or you keep feeling that bitterness. So there's not really, I don't get a lot of lingering bitterness with this one. And sweetness, I think it's actually a little bit sweet. And so that's why a lot of times I think of honey. But really nothing is like jumping out at me as far as certain flavors other than grass, like I said earlier. And then we look at the finish. So how long does it kind of last in your mouth? A lot of lighter beers are made to not really have any lasting finish because they want you to just keep drinking more. Some of the higher ABV, like darker beers, might have a longer lasting finish because they're made to be sipped and savored and, take a while to drink them. So this one again is kind of like medium. It's not like leaving my mouth immediately, but it's not sticking around a lot either. So I'd say medium. And then we can look at, other things like, just overall, like, is it pleasant? Do I want to drink more? Do I want to drink less? How much would I drink at one time, etc. And I will say that, again, with a lot of beer, things are situational. So if I'm drinking this by itself, I might have one and then think, okay, I want to move on and try something different. If I'm eating, this is great because it's pretty light. It's well balanced. It's easy to drink. So, it's not clashing with any of the food I would be eating necessarily. So it's refreshing, and I would drink a few of these throughout my meal. But if I was just sitting in a beer garden and I was just drinking like half liter after half liter of this, I would kind of like maybe get bored pretty soon. And then we look at the quality overall. So some of our options here are faulty, poor, acceptable, good, very good, outstanding. So you could look at this in two ways. Like, does it meet the criteria of this style? Then yes, it's very good or outstanding. And considering that Spaten has been around since 1397, they know what they're doing. So we could say that it's outstanding. But I feel too that it's also subjective. You know, sometimes people love a beer and I think, well, it's well made and it's a good product, but I don't personally really enjoy it. So if I was judging a beer, I would judge it based on, does it meet the criteria? Is it true to style? But for me, as far as quality for like a beer like this, I would say, yeah, it's good. I don't know if it's very good, but it's good. And then on the back, we've got, again, lots of options for what does it taste like? So let's see. If we were to talk about like bread, which I think is something important to talk about with lagers like this, because you are getting a lot more of the malt character. Some of the options are, do you get bread dough, water cracker, bread crumb, bread crust, digestive biscuit or graham cracker, toasted bread or burnt bread. So a lot of different bread options. So I would say maybe a light toast and maybe bread crust. And I also say that knowing that Munich HELLES beers, that style of beer, are typically brewed with Munich malt. And Munich malt is slightly kilned to like a very, very light amber color. So it's not the palest malt option. It's like a couple steps up from that. So I would say that you're getting a little bit of that coming through because that's how this beer is made. It's made with that specific type of malt. We're not really going to see a lot of things like smoke, nuts, you know, like hazelnut or cocoa or coffee, which are, I guess, beans, nuts. I'm not getting a lot of dried fruit because that's usually from, you know, darker beers, darker malts, the yeast. This is a very just neutral yeast that's used. I would say that there's maybe some floral. And again, when I first started drinking beer, and even now, and even with wine, when I'm at work, I'll say, oh, this is really fruity, or this is really floral, which isn't super helpful. So is it rose? Is it geranium? Is it lavender? Is it jasmine? And one thing that I need to do and start getting better at is actually going and getting some of those products, like getting some dried rose petals, getting some lavender, and just having them and being able to smell them and compare it to the beer. Because sometimes I think, well, I've smelled jasmine before, but I don't remember what it smells like. So I can't really connect that this is jasmine and it smells like jasmine, like the flower. So that's something that I need to try and be better about. But like for right now, there's actually a chamomile option, like chamomile tea. And I would actually maybe go with that a little bit. There's also an herbal or herbaceous category. And so that's when we talk about things like grass, hay, any herbs like mint, dill, sage, rosemary, etc. I don't get a lot of those in this, but maybe a little bit of grass. Yeah. And I'm not really getting any of the other things. I'm not getting the weird I think it tends to be weird, like barnyard, or what we call like horse blanket. There's no clove, there's no spice, there's no off flavors. When we talk about off flavors, like we've mentioned, you're getting things like corn or buttery, cheesy, or maybe it's like it just smells like sour, like vinegar. I don't get any of those. So, I mean, overall, this is a solid beer, which is true to the style, which is Munich Helles. And now what I'm going to do is go and check my note cards and see if I'm close to any of these characteristics that I just threw out. So yeah, I don't know. I hope you enjoyed watching me drink and just rant about beer and ramble on, because that's what I tend to do. So I'm going to finish this beer because I do actually enjoy it. It's after lunchtime, so it's totally acceptable to be drinking right now. And then I'm going to pick out my next beer that I'm going to talk about. So I hope you enjoyed joining me on this first video. And if you have questions for me or you want me to talk about something specific, let me know. I'd love to hear it. I enjoy teaching about brewing. I enjoy brewing itself. I love wine. I love traveling and going to breweries and, you know, all of that stuff that goes along with it. So cheers, thank you, and enjoy your beer.